Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. He smiled innocently, but I knew better. That smile, soft, almost shy, hid something deeper than he wanted anyone to notice. And yet, for reasons I couldn't explain, I noticed it right away. Maybe because I've learned to read people too well. Or maybe because I've worn that same smile myself when I was pretending everything was fine while the world inside me trembled. It was a rainy afternoon, one of those days where the sky can't decide if it wants to cry or hold back. I was standing under the awning of the local coffee shop, clutching a paper cup that had already gone lukewarm. My reflection in the window looked tired, older than I remembered being. The kind of face that carried stories no one had asked to hear. Then he appeared. He was helping an older woman carry her grocery bags through the puddles, his jacket soaked but his smile steady. When she thanked him, he nodded, almost embarrassed, and ducked under the same awning where I stood. Our eyes met briefly, a quiet, polite exchange, but something lingered in that glance. A flicker of recognition, though I was certain I didn't know him. "You picked the wrong day to forget an umbrella," he said, shaking the water from his sleeves. His voice had that warmth people usually earn through kindness, not charm. "I picked the wrong week for everything," I replied, half joking. He chuckled softly, looking at me as if he could see right through the joke. "That bad?" "Worse," I said, before I realized how honest that sounded. He didn't pry. He just nodded, the way someone does when they know not to ask more. And that's when I noticed it, the innocence in his smile, the quiet understanding behind it. Something about him didn't quite fit with the simplicity he showed the world. We ended up sharing the awning longer than expected. The rain had turned to a downpour, trapping us there like two strangers forced into an awkward kind of companionship. He told me his name was Daniel. Said he'd recently moved back to town after years away. I told him mine, though I hesitated before saying it, as if it might mean more to him than it should. He laughed easily, asked questions that made me forget the heaviness I'd been carrying all week. There was something refreshingly genuine about him. But beneath that, I sensed a guardedness, a subtle distance. It wasn't in his words, it was in the pauses between them. When the rain finally slowed, I made an excuse to leave. He offered to walk me to my car, and though I almost said no, I let him. There was something safe about his presence, even if I couldn't quite trust the feeling. To my car, he hesitated. "Maybe I'll see you here again," he said. "Maybe," I replied, though we both knew how unlikely that was. But life has a strange way of proving me wrong. The next morning, I found him again, same coffee shop, same quiet smile. He was reading a newspaper, the old-fashioned kind, folded perfectly in half. When he saw me, he looked surprised, then amused. "You again," he said. "Don't tell me you live here," I teased. "Something like that," he said with that same disarming calmness. "You?" I told him I came here every morning before work, though that wasn't exactly true. I'd been coming only since my husband and I separated, a routine I'd built to fill the silence. Daniel didn't ask about it, and I didn't offer the explanation. But in his eyes, I saw that he somehow knew. We started talking every morning after that. Sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes long enough for my coffee to go cold again. I found myself looking forward to it, which felt strange at first, like rediscovering a piece of myself I'd forgotten existed. He wasn't flirtatious or overly charming. He just listened. And that's a rare thing to find. But over time, I began noticing little things. The way he sometimes looked away when I asked about his past. How he'd changed the subject whenever someone mentioned family. He always smiled innocently, as though it didn't matter, but I knew better. I'd spent years married to a man who hid his pain behind a grin. I recognized the look too well. One morning, as we sat by the window watching the sun break through the mist, he said something that stayed with me. "People think they can start over just by changing where they live," he said quietly. "But the things that haunt you, they don't need a map. They always find you." It was the first real glimpse of something beneath that smile. And I wanted to ask, what was haunting him? What had brought him back to this small town with its empty streets and familiar ghosts? But before I could, he looked at me and said, "You understand that, don't you?" I nodded, unable to speak. Because I did understand. That was the morning everything shifted. Not in some dramatic way, no grand gestures, no confessions, but in the silence that followed. The way our eyes met and lingered just a second too long. The understanding that both of us were carrying stories we hadn't told anyone in years. When I left that day, his smile followed me. Still innocent, still calm, but now, I saw it differently. It wasn't a mask. It was a shield. A gentle way of keeping the world at a distance. And for reasons I couldn't yet name, I wanted to know what was behind it. That night, as I sat alone with a book I wasn't really reading, I kept replaying our conversations. His tone, his patience, the careful way he listened. There was something healing in it, but also something dangerous, the kind of quiet connection that could pull two lonely people into something they never planned. I told myself not to go back the next morning. I even promised I wouldn't. But when dawn came and the air smelled faintly of rain again, I found myself walking toward that same coffee shop, and when I saw him there looking up, smiling innocently like it was all just a coincidence, I felt it again. That small spark I couldn't explain, because sometimes, what feels innocent isn't simple at all, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. He smiled innocently again that morning, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I could feel it in the way his eyes lingered a moment longer, in how his voice softened when he said my name. It wasn't romance, not in the way people imagine it. It was something quieter, more dangerous, connection. The kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Daniel was sitting at our usual corner table, the one near the window where the sunlight spilled just enough to warm your hands but not blind you. He had a notebook open in front of him, a half-written page of something I couldn't quite make out. When he saw me, he closed it quickly, almost too quickly. "Morning," he said, that same boyish grin on his face. "Morning," I replied, though I couldn't help noticing the tension behind his smile. "What are you writing?" He shrugged. "Just thoughts." I let the silence sit between us, sipping my coffee. There was a heaviness to him that day, a quiet weight pressing on his shoulders. And though I wanted to ask, I knew better than to push. Sometimes people tell you more by what they don't say. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving the streets glistening, and the smell of wet pavement drifted in through the open door. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that feels like a pause before something inevitable. He looked out the window for a long moment before speaking again. "You ever think about how people come into your life right when you stop expecting it?" I smiled faintly. "I think about that more than I admit." He turned to me then, his gaze steady. "And do you ever wonder why?" There it was again, that gentle probing, the sense that he wasn't just making small talk. He was searching for something in my answer. "I used to think it was chance," I said slowly. "But now, I think maybe it's timing. Sometimes we meet people not because we're ready, but because we need to be reminded that we still can." He nodded, eyes softening, and said quietly, "That's exactly it." Something in his tone made me shiver, not from fear, but from the realization that he understood me in a way few people had. For the next few weeks, our morning talks became a habit neither of us named. He told me about books he loved, places he'd lived, moments that shaped him. But never about what brought him back here. And every time I came close to asking, he would smile that same innocent smile and steer the conversation somewhere else. One morning, as we sat with the soft hum of the coffee machine in the background, I noticed the faint scar on his wrist, thin, pale, almost hidden. He caught me looking but didn't pull away. "Car accident," he said quietly, though his eyes said there was more to it. "I'm sorry," I murmured. He smiled, a little too easily. "Don't be." I walked away. That's more than I expected. After that, the air between us changed. We spoke less, but somehow understood more. The pauses grew longer, heavier, but never uncomfortable. It was as if our silences said the things we weren't ready to admit. One afternoon, when I came in later than usual, I found him outside instead, standing by the river that ran behind the cafe. The sun was low, turning the water into ribbons of gold. He didn't notice me at first. He was staring at the horizon with that same stillness I'd come to recognize. I walked up beside him quietly. "You disappeared on me," I said softly. He smiled again, that innocent curve of his lips that made everything seem lighter. "Just needed some air." "Bad day?" He hesitated, then said, "You could say that. My father's house was sold this morning. First time it's changed hands in 40 years. I turned to look at him, unsure what to say. "That must be hard." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "He passed a few months ago. I didn't even know until after. We hadn't spoken in years." I could hear the effort it took him to keep his voice even. The restraint in his tone said more than his words ever could. "I'm sorry," I said again, this time meaning it differently. He finally looked at me, really looked, and there was something raw in his eyes, something that broke through that calm exterior. "You don't have to be." I wasn't much of a son. For a long while, we just stood there, the river murmuring below, the breeze carrying the scent of rain and earth. I wanted to tell him that he didn't owe anyone perfection, that forgiveness sometimes comes too late but still matters. But instead, I simply placed a hand on his arm. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just closed his eyes for a moment, as if the small gesture was enough to steady him. When he opened them again, he smiled, that same innocent smile that had first caught my attention weeks ago. But now I could see it clearly for what it was, a fragile defense. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not asking for more than I can give." His words stayed with me long after I went home. They echoed in the quiet of my kitchen, in the sound of the clock ticking, in the spaces where my own loneliness used to live. I didn't know what we were, not friends, not strangers, something in between. But what I did know was that Daniel had started to remind me what connection felt like again. Not the loud, overwhelming kind I'd once known, but something gentler. That night, as I watched the city lights flicker from my window, I realized something unexpected. It wasn't his mystery that drew me in. It was his honesty, the kind that came without explanation or promises. Still, somewhere deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he wasn't telling me. And when he smiled the next morning, as though nothing had changed, I finally understood he was protecting something. Not from me, but from himself. And I wasn't sure yet if I was ready to find out what it was. He smiled innocently, again. But this time, I didn't smile back. Because I finally realized what his smile meant. It wasn't charm. It wasn't ease. It was a wall, carefully built, perfectly maintained. And behind it, something was trembling. It had been almost 2 months since that first rainy afternoon. Our coffee shop meetings had turned into an unspoken ritual. We never planned them, never texted, never called, we simply showed up. Some mornings he was already there, waiting with 2 cups. Some mornings, I arrived first and pretended not to look toward the door every few seconds. It was comfortable, familiar. But also, dangerously so. That morning, something about him was off. His hair was damp from the drizzle outside, his jacket unzipped, his notebook missing. He sat quietly, staring at his untouched coffee. When I slid into the seat across from him, he didn't even notice. "Rough night?" I asked gently. He blinked, as if waking from a dream. "Sorry. Just thinking." "About what?" He hesitated, his thumb tracing the rim of his cup. Then he said, "About how people disappear long before they actually leave." I froze. The tone in his voice, it wasn't bitterness, it was regret. Before I could respond, he continued. "My father used to say that when people stop talking, it's not because they have nothing to say. It's because they've already said everything they could." The way he said it. I knew he wasn't talking about his father anymore. "I don't think silence always means goodbye," I said softly. "Sometimes it's survival." He looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw the storm behind his calm expression. "You say that like you've lived it." "I have." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already guessed. Then that smile, that same small, innocent smile, appeared again. But now it looked almost painful, like it was holding something in place that wanted to fall apart. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you don't have to pretend with me." He stared at me for a long moment, and then let out a breath that seemed to carry years with it. "I lost someone," he said finally. "Not recently, but it doesn't feel like it ever stopped." He paused, watching the steam fade from his coffee. "Her name was Emily. We were together for 7 years. And then one night, she was gone. Just like that. No note, no call. Nothing." I felt my chest tighten. "I spent months convincing myself she'd come back," he continued. "But she didn't. And eventually, I stopped waiting. Or at least, I told myself I had." There was no anger in his voice, just exhaustion. The kind that only comes from carrying a story too long alone. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He shook his head. "Don't be." I think I started smiling just to make people believe I was okay. And then, after a while, I started believing it too. We sat in silence, listening to the quiet buzz of the cafe around us, the low hum of conversation, the clinking of cups. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, painting the glass in soft streaks. For the first time, I didn't see him as mysterious or unreadable. I saw him as human, fragile, imperfect, trying. After a moment, I said, "You know, that smile of yours fooled me too." He laughed, a genuine, quiet laugh that broke through the heaviness. "You caught on quicker than most." "I knew better," I said simply. He looked at me with a kind of respect I hadn't felt in years, not admiration, not pity. Just understanding. "And you? What are you hiding behind your calm voice and morning coffee?" It was my turn to look away. Maybe the same thing. Loss. Regret. Trying to remember who I was before everything got quiet. He nodded, and for a while, we didn't need to speak. It was strange, sitting there with someone I barely knew, yet feeling more seen than I had in years. When I stood to leave, he reached for my hand instinctively, then stopped himself. "Wait," he said. "Do you ever walk by the river in the evenings?" I hesitated. "Sometimes." "Then maybe I'll see you there." It wasn't an invitation. It was a promise. That evening, I went. I don't know why, maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. The sun had already set, and the air carried that cool scent of autumn. I found him leaning against the railing, his reflection rippling in the dark water. "You were right," he said without turning. "About silence. It's not goodbye. It's survival." I stood beside him, the two of us framed by the glow of the street lamps. "You don't have to survive alone," I said quietly. He smiled again, softer this time, not hiding anything. "Maybe not anymore." There was no grand moment, no sudden realization or confession. Just two people standing side by side, not fixing each other, not saving each other, just being. And yet, in that quiet, something shifted. As we walked together toward the dim lights of the street, I realized that healing doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it begins with a simple truth. He smiled innocently. And this time, I smiled back, not because I believed everything was fine, but because I finally understood that neither of us had to pretend anymore. Still, deep inside, a question lingered. If he had lost someone named Emily, why did I have the feeling that her story wasn't finished yet? He smiled innocently, one last time. But by then, I'd learned that every smile of his carried a memory, every silence hid a truth. What I didn't know was that his truth would change the way I saw him and myself forever. It happened a few days after our walk by the river. I hadn't seen him since that evening. He didn't show up at the coffee shop, and though I told myself it didn't matter, I kept glancing toward the door every time it opened. By the third morning, I started to worry. On the fourth day, I found an envelope tucked under my coffee cup. My name was written in his familiar handwriting, neat, deliberate, and careful. For a moment, I thought my heart might stop. Inside was a single note: "By the river tonight. Please." I don't know what I expected, maybe closure, maybe another quiet conversation that would fade into memory. But when I arrived, the look on his face told me this time was different. He was standing near the same spot as before, the wind tugging at his jacket, his hands deep in his pockets. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the water, and the air felt heavy with the promise of rain. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I replied, though we both knew that wasn't true. He smiled faintly. "I needed to see you before I go." "Go?" I echoed. He nodded. "I got a job offer, out of state. Somewhere quiet. I think it's time I stopped haunting this town." The word haunting caught in my chest. "And you weren't going to say goodbye?" "I didn't think I could," he said softly. "Goodbyes have never gone well for me." We stood there, the sound of the river filling the spaces between words. I wanted to tell him not to go, to stay, to keep our fragile, simple routine alive. But I couldn't. Because I knew what it meant to need a new beginning. "I understand," I said quietly. "You need to let go." He looked at me, then really looked, with that same deep, searching gaze that had once made me feel transparent. "That's just it," he said. "I thought I'd already let go. Of her. Of everything. But then I met you." My breath caught. He took a small step closer. "You reminded me what it felt like to care about someone without fear. To talk without pretending. To smile and mean it." There was no weight of romance in his voice, no expectation. It was gratitude, raw and unguarded. "Daniel," I started, but he shook his head. "I'm not asking for anything," he said gently. "I just needed you to know. Because for the first time since she left, I feel at peace." I felt tears sting my eyes, though I didn't want him to see. "You found your way back," I whispered. He nodded, smiling softly. Maybe we both did. The rain began to fall then, light at first, then heavier. Neither of us moved. It felt right somehow, standing there, two people washed clean by something larger than either of us could control. He handed me something, a small, worn notebook. The one I'd seen him close so quickly that first morning. I used to write to her, he said. Letters I never sent. But the last few pages, they're for you. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not yet. He turned toward the bridge, the glow of the street lamps outlining his silhouette. Take care of yourself, he said, his voice steady but low. You deserve quiet too. And then he walked away. No dramatic goodbye, no backward glance. Just the sound of footsteps fading into the rain. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, the notebook heavy in my hands. When I finally opened it, the pages smelled faintly of coffee and rain. His handwriting filled the lines, steady, careful, alive. The last page held only a few words, "Thank you for seeing me." That night, I sat by my window, watching the rain blur the city lights, and read every page. Some were letters to Emily, full of sorrow and longing. Others were reflections, small fragments of healing. And then, near the end, his words shifted. They became lighter, filled with moments we had shared, the coffee shop, the laughter, the river. I realized then that he hadn't written those pages for me to understand him. He'd written them so that I might understand myself, that we can be both broken and whole, that connection doesn't always mean forever, and that some people come into our lives only long enough to show us what peace feels like. Weeks passed before I stopped expecting to see him. The coffee shop felt quieter, the mornings slower. But there was a calm in me that hadn't been there before. Sometimes, when the light hits the window just right or the smell of rain drifts through the air, I still think of that smile, innocent, gentle, a little sad, and I smile too. Because I knew better. He wasn't a mystery to be solved or a story to be finished. He was a reminder that even after loss, after silence, after years of pretending, it's still possible to feel something honest. And though he walked away, part of his peace stayed with me, not as a memory to mourn, but as a truth to carry, because sometimes, the people who stay the shortest, leave the deepest calm behind.